You are listening to the IoT For All Media Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All Podcast, the number one publication and resource for the Internet of Things. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done so. If you're listening to this on a podcast directory, we would truly appreciate it if you would subscribe so you get the latest episodes as soon as they are out. All right, my name is Ryan Chacon. I'll be your host. And on today's episode, we have Thomas Gere, the Senior Business Development of 5G Edge IoT at Renesa. They are an organization that is continually striving to drive innovation with a comprehensive portfolio of microcontrollers, analog, and power devices. On this episode, we talk a lot about the combination of private and LTE 5G DOS network integration with smart buildings and kind of how that fits into the IoT space, leading use cases for smart buildings, the ROI goals of smart building and smart building managers and owners have, different other connectivity options in the space, as well as challenges that they see from their point of view. All in all, fantastic episode. I think you get a lot of value out of it. But before we get into it, any of you out there are looking to enter the fast-growing and profitable IoT market, but don't know where to start? Check out our sponsor, Leverage. Leverage's IoT solutions development platform provides everything you need to create turnkey IoT products that you can white label and resell under your own brand. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT For All Podcast. Welcome, Thomas, to the IoT For All Podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Me as well. Let's start off by having you to give a quick introduction about yourself to our audience.
Yes, Thomas Gere. I work for Renesa. I joined them last year. They're a very large semiconductor company and well known in automotive and IoT. And I've joined after a career as an entrepreneur and intrapreneur as well, looking into 5G and also retail IoT and other emerging technologies the last few years. And I'm bringing the combination of 5G private networking, working with tier one telcos, as well as smart building IoT, which is what we are going to discuss today.
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about the company's role in the IoT space.
Sure. So actually, my team comes from a company called Echelon. So that has been acquired multiple times in the last few years. And the core of the team is still there. And they invented the LAN-Works ILAN protocol around 30 years ago. And then it has been pretty successful. They got lots of traction in smart cities. So a lot of city lights, for example, are equipped with the Echelon solution, and still today. And they've evolved the product into a hardware and software stack where they are serving basically mostly now the smart building market. To bridge basically older protocols and newer ones, and basically translate data streams into digital twin that can basically be used by building management systems and also analytics and smart basically intelligence platforms.
Fantastic. So yeah, I know you mentioned a second ago what we kind of plan to talk about here in the smart building space, but tell us just from your perspective what the landscape kind of looks like and feels like for you in the smart building space as it relates to things that are going on with IoT.
Yeah, so I can see the very large traditional players from one side. They obviously have a top to bottom solution. And they've been around a lot. Most of them have their hardware, or they OEM the hardware, from a few suppliers. And obviously, they try to get market traction around offering a whole solution end to end. And then I can see the disruptors to that. So intelligence prop tech companies, so IoT prop tech, where you'll have data intelligence with dashboards. Some of them just doing reporting and analysis, others doing more offering automation as well. And then there are companies that are just doing gateway controllers, basically the hardware that is going to bridge those software solutions, including building management systems, or building automation systems, different terminologies according to where you're based in the world. And those can be, fragmented, and the gateway controllers most of the time are just a piece of hardware, and there's nothing on them really apart from the drivers themselves, to basically have a system to connect and bridge all the protocols that might be already in place in a building. If it's a retrofit project, for example, if you're going to redo and upgrade a building that has a simple manual control system into an automated and smart optimized energy one, and there is a gap basically in the market. That's how I can see. So I can see a lot of this disruption. I'm actually looking into prospective partnerships myself. So it's part of my work is to look at the landscape in terms of the AI software as a service. The facilities managers are also expanding their offering. So from purely offering management service, they're also going into energy optimization and analytics and dashboards, and that can serve them well as well, because obviously they can have internally they can get savings, but they can also offer another business. So there's a lot of different players now in the industry, and I think it's a very interesting time because even startups that have 10 to 15 people are getting really big contracts. So I can see a lot of acquisitions as well, and you probably know more than I do, because obviously you're releasing a lot of news regularly, and some of the big guys are obviously acquiring interesting startups. Plus telcos as well are going into IoT, and that's another topic as well, where more than asset tracking, they're looking at expanding their services offering. So that's an interesting one as well to look into.
And what from what you've seen happening in the market, are there any use cases in the smart building kind of environment that are really leading the way?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's more coming from the needs. So you have energy costs that are going higher and higher. So you want to save energy bills. So obviously, if you optimize your building with smart building management systems, and you have the right devices and interfaces in place, you can achieve that. Then you have well-being. So from a health perspective for occupants, not only because of COVID, but that's one reason. Obviously, you want to have the right sensors to monitor air quality, but you also want people to be to have a pleasant office and have a nice place to visit if it's a public venue. So those are very important metrics for building owners and facilities management now, and they're investing heavily in retrofits to be able to achieve that.
And when you work with a company kind of on these types of projects, or you're exposed to these types of projects, what are the ROI goals that these companies and these building owners, property owners are looking for when they're getting involved in IoT? I know it obviously depends on per use case, but is there kind of at a high level, is there common ROIs that maybe is more specific to this industry as opposed to just kind of the broader sense of, they're always trying to save costs to become more efficient?
Yeah, I think at the moment as well, you want to optimize the space. So on the top of the energy monitoring and optimization, also occupants' well-being, you want to optimize your space. So if you're a landlord or an FM that is managing a building and looking after the tenants, you want to make sure that all the floor space is occupied and is optimized, so you can get a higher yield. So that's also from an economics point of view. If you're building or retrofitting and selling off a building, you're increasing the value by having a smart building system as well. So that's also another type of economics that's very important. And obviously you want to future-proof the building as well. That's more a long-term value. So do you have systems in place that are opened and able to be upgraded, not only for smart buildings, but connectivity as well. So that's, you're offering, cellular connectivity, you can have private networking, You can have basically other important, basically services for public venues and also corporate real estate.
And when you mentioned connectivity here for a second, can you talk about, and this is a discussion I've had with others in the past, not necessarily as it relates to the smart building space, but just generally about private LTE, 5G kind of networks. How is that playing a role in the smart building landscape and just the enablement of solutions that are becoming more popular as you're getting kind of into like private versus the public networks? What is being utilized more and kind of how's that fitting in?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because, for the last 5-6 years, traditionally, 5G has been, and in terms of private networking, has been looking at industrial 5G, so manufacturing, ports, and actually, when you dig into those, they don't really have a need for 5G as a core technology. Then it is as a complementary one for specific use cases. So if it's a very big industrial campus, they might benefit from having 5G, basically because all their assets are moving in a very large area, and in the past as well, they would benefit from private LTE, for example, when they had interference. So if the warehouse had a lot of metal infrastructure, and obviously. That has an advantage versus the old versions of Wi-Fi. But now Wi-Fi is evolving, Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 coming, and basically they're addressing all those problems, including the density of devices that are connected at the same time, because that's one of the big thing that 5G is bringing, and bandwidth as well. So it's addressing those problems plus interference as well by having different basically bandwidths. And different bands on the spectrum as well. So those are where traditionally where 5G was being looked at, and it's still there's still a lot of working groups around that.
Right.
But you can already see in the media that people are asking why there's not more traction on this. And basically, because I think hybrid networking is the answer for that. But to answer your question, in smart buildings. Traditionally as well, you'll have the private network system integrators and distributed antenna systems. So basically the ability to expand the public cellular network. So basically if you are in a mall underground, you wouldn't have external areas that would reach your mobile. So you might be out of coverage. And the distributed antenna system, so the DAS is bringing you coverage. And to do that, it's quite expensive, because there's a lot of radio survey that needs to be done so that, all the important locations are covered. The equipment is expensive. And, that's been a barrier. And only, the biggest stadiums and big malls have been able to do that, or very remote areas. And that's changing. That's being disrupted by new players, and also of some telco vendors that are also been doing a lot of innovation on this with virtualized solutions, where you're able to put a lot of the stack of the network in the cloud and or on servers if it needs to be on premise, but in a fully virtualized way. So you're able to use existing white box basically hardware. And what it means is that you're able to slice the network. So you'll have a private network, you'll have a public one, and you connect to the backhaul of the telcos. So they are providing the services to the end user like you will be, and you're basically simplifying the whole equation. So that means that the costs to install are reducing dramatically, and you can just use the existing backbone of a network in a building. And that means that this same backbone, you can also share with it all the IoT framework that you're using to connect to, for example, HVAC. If you're using Ethernet and power over Ethernet, your Ethernet network can be in the background, and then you use smart gateways to basically exchange data and connect different protocols. So if you have LoRa, and then you might have Wi-Fi, and you have the Ethernet in the background. Those can enable to have basically this hybrid network.
Mhm.
That what I mean is that instead of having a system integrator for smart buildings and another for private networks, those can either work together, or a similar, the same system integrator can deploy, a private network or distributed antenna system, so public network expansion, and a smart building at the same time. And the advantage here as well is that by doing this, because it's smart buildings, as we know, and we can talk about it here, you can achieve, in average 30% energy cost reduction, and maintenance as well, cost reduction by having predictive maintenance. You can bring those savings to your investment costs when you are investing in a private network or in a distributed antenna system, and you're doing the smart building upgrade at the same time. You can bring those energy savings, to reduce your capex and your opex, so your investment in capital to have those upgrades done, and your operating as well costs. So your total cost of ownership is going to be diminished drastically, and as a result, that can really open, the door and make those two or three technologies, accessible to more building owners. It doesn't have to be, the biggest shopping malls and the biggest airports and the biggest, CREs. It's actually reachable to people that just want, their visitors to basically have continuous, 4G and 5G coverage when they come to their offices.
Right.
And at the same time, they can privatize their network, having a hybrid Wi-Fi plus cellular, connectivity. And at the same time, they have smart buildings. So all this, all in one, because basically technologies have been simplified. So it's much more accessible, and the learning curve as well for system integrators is much simpler, much faster, because there's software-defined networking involved. And this is making it much easier. Plus, you have subscription, models as well, even for public and private 5G connectivity now. So that's also changing the game.
Gotcha. Fantastic. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you is, when, we've talked a lot about different kind of areas as it connects to the smart building space, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing lead the way from an adoption standpoint in this industry? Are there things that are still difficult for companies to kind of get over the hump to adopt? And if so, what are they? And what advice do you have for companies to kind of work through them?
Yeah, I mean, some people might think that they are stuck with the system. That's one scenario, and that we can see quite often. So they're stuck with one system, and they think that they cannot come out of it, basically, and the system cannot talk, to open platforms, and really, they and then the costs for, if they keep that system, to also add, a total energy optimization service might be prohibitive. So they think, I'm going to have to rip everything out if I want to basically have a more modular approach, and have those new guys bringing me the smart building solution. And that's a misconception. There are solutions today that can actually interface older systems from the big guys to newer ones. So that's something that we do, for example, with the smart server. And it's important, because otherwise you just get stuck in one system until you're forced to upgrade, for example, at the last minute, if you have ESG targets for your building. So I know here in the UK, by 2030, people have to at least achieve a B on the EPC scale, which is basically they need to be extremely sustainable. And then, as we know, the 2050, which is longer term, this just needs to be they need to have the best smart building systems in place at all times, so that they have net zero emission. And so that's been one problem. Second is also obviously the preconception about costs. So same thing applies for private network, distributed antenna system. As with smart buildings, people think it's too prohibitive, it's expensive to do it. But actually, there are already suppliers that provide self-install, kits. Or, for us, for example, the smart server, we have a library of 300, devices built in. So it can be either, put in an existing, integrated legacy and building an automation system by an integrator, add sensors, and already you'll have, a first phase of a smart building system in place at very low cost, because you won't have to completely replace everything. So that's an example.
Fantastic. And for companies out there looking to kind of go down this route and potentially adopt some of these use cases and things that we're talking about now, what's the best way you think they can go about doing that?
Yeah, I think they should basically reach out, to system integrators that are specialized, in IoT consultants as well as specialized in energy optimization, and find out, get a survey and get some data of, what it could bring them in terms of, energy optimization. Can they upgrade as well some of their, grid connection, because now you have smart grids that are coming as well, where you can have some local energy, production on the system, where you can actually sell that off, and that can further reduce, your energy costs as well. And you can even, you can actually make money from it. So that's the next big thing. And at the same time, just inquire, look at the press like IoT For All, and see what other, building owners and managers have been achieving, in terms of results. Because it's becoming consistent now, 30 to 50%, savings on energy, a lot less predictive maintenance, so you can reduce, some of your operating costs as well. So there's a lot to do, and there's a lot to learn. But solutions are becoming simpler, and there's a lot of different stages you can actually adopt technologies from, and it doesn't have to be a full scale solution from the beginning. It can be done step by step.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think most of the experts they have on here advocate for. Start small, start simple, start proving the ROI, and then once you do that, you can scale. And then also when you scale, initial solution usually opens up other ideas and other channels to be able to do more on top of what you've already done, especially in a smart building space. There's just so much you can do in one environment. And I think that's always an important thing to think about, especially from the onset, because the infrastructure that you lay down at the beginning is going to help contribute to the success of all those use cases down the line. So all very, very good points. For audience out there who wants to learn more, follow up, stay in touch, maybe kind of dive in a bit further to these topics, connect with you, anybody on your team, what's the best way that they can do that?
Yeah, so the best is to reach out to me, connect on LinkedIn, and also we have an email for our team. If people want to connect to us, they can do so. On the edge. info@yasimi.com, and I can share more information as well if we have some notes for the podcasts on how to do that.
Fantastic. Well, Thomas, thank you so much again for your time. It's been a great conversation. I think our audience is getting a ton of value out of it. So really appreciate it, and would love to find another opportunity to have you back.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for watching that episode of the IoT For All podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please click the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to hit the bell notification so you get the latest episodes as soon as they become available. Other than that, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.